Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the show. My name is indeed Avrum Rosensweig. You know, there are moments that divide history into a before and an after, and there are people whose lives are forever caught at that dividing line. My guest today is Virginia Buckingham. We'll call her Ginny, author of the deeply personal memoir On My Watch. How are you, Ginny?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with us. Before September 11th, 2001, Virginia was one of the Massachusetts' most accomplished young public servants. She served as chief of staff to two consecutive governors. Then, at only 35 years old, became the first woman to lead the Massachusetts Port Authority, which operates Boston's Logan International Airport. And then came 9/11. American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, the two planes that struck the World Trade Center, had departed from Logan's airport. In the anguish and confusion that followed, Virginia found herself publicly blamed, politically abandoned, and eventually forced to resign. 2 years later, she was named personally in a wrongful death lawsuit. Although the 9/11 Commission would later find that the airport checkpoints had operated according to the federal rules in place at that time, public exoneration could not erase the private wounds. Ginny endured years of guilt, self-doubt, and post-traumatic stress as she struggled to rebuild her identity, her career, and her life. Her memoir, originally published in 2020 by Cavon Bridge Press in New York, has given a new voice to an extraordinary story of leadership, of faith, of resilience, and a greater understanding of relationships. On My Watch is not simply a book about September 11th. It is about what happens when the world assigns you a story that is simply not true, and how you find the courage to reclaim your own life. It is about Ginny Buckingham, a stoic, a fragile person, intent upon living life correctly and honestly, who wrote, "I was broken by being blamed for the hijacking, not instantly, not shattered like a hand-blown glass, but over time, like a bottle tossed into the sea, tumbled apart by the movement of the waves." Ginny Buckingham, welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
My total pleasure to talk to your listeners.
Ginny, when you hear that introduction, how do you feel viscerally? How do you feel?
Grateful to kind, insightful people like yourself who see the story for what it is and what it isn't. Because on its surface, it's another 9/11 story, but more so it's about the personal impact of things that come your way in life that are beyond your control and how you manage them. And I appreciate you seeing that difference there and having this conversation.
Is there both a blessing and a curse in what you have gone through vis-a-vis 9/11?
Look, I wouldn't wish what happened to my worst enemy. Yeah. And I don't, first of all, equate what happened with me to the losses that were felt by thousands of families. My loss is different. I didn't lose a person, a love. I don't have to grieve that every day. What I do have to grieve is the pain that was wrought on our world, and that was then placed on my shoulders as something I could have changed in any way. And that is a heavy burden to bear, and I've learned to bear it well and to do good with it. So when you ask the dichotomy of a blessing or a curse, it's neither. It happened, and I can't change what happened in terms of the blame that was directed at me. I can only try to make some sense of it, make some meaning with it, and do some good with it.
On 9/11 itself, as I mentioned in the introduction, you were responsible for Logan Airport, um, which is amazing in of itself. You were young, right? You had just come off of some pretty incredible gigs, chief of
Mhm.
staff for some important politicians in that area. And here you were running an airport. Do you remember going back to when you secured that job, what your feelings were, what your thoughts were? Did you feel like an imposter a little bit, or did you feel like, no, man, I can do this?
Well, first and foremost, I didn't want the job. So just to level set there, I, at the time, as you said, was chief of staff to the second governor I had served under. And I loved that job. I loved helping drive Governor Cellucci's policy priorities, managing his cabinet executive staff. It was a big role and a really meaningful role that required both management skills and strategic skills and political skills. And I thrived in it. When the job at Massport, which is a quasi-public authority that oversees Logan Airport and other infrastructure, came available, I didn't ask for it. I was asked 3 times by the governor and his team if I would do it. And he said, I want to send my best person over there, which was a very kind thing to say. And the job was very much similar to what I was doing in the State House, in that I had a professional running the airport, I had a professional running the Port of Boston. I had operational leaders in all of those roles. And what they needed was someone who could help them achieve the priorities of operating those facilities. Logan, if you've ever flown into it, is right smack in the middle of the city. It is surrounded by urban neighborhoods, and has congressional, mayoral, and other political pressures constantly as it tries to get traffic in and out and planes in and out. And that really was the job, was helping the operational team navigate those challenges.
I'm curious. My entire career, a working career, I've worked in an office. I launched a humanitarian organization, Jewish humanitarian organization here, and I would go to work. I would send teams off abroad because we did humanitarian work in Guyana and Zimbabwe. But your office was a little bit different. Like you would go to the airport and you would work out of the airport, and I'm sure you walk the floors just to get a great sense of what was going on from day to day, right?
I was a bit of an type A when it came to leading that team. I had about 1,000 people on my team, and overall at Logan, there was about 16,000 people working for the airlines and the suppliers and all the rest. And we had a pretty clear agenda. The biggest thing we were trying to achieve at the time was to help Logan manage its delays. Like, what's worse for a passenger than being stuck in an airport because their plane was delayed? And Logan was the 18th most delayed in the country at that time. So we were working on building a new runway. We were working on other customer service priorities, kind of all the things that were dogging aviation in the US at that time. Congress was considering passing a passenger bill of rights because of those kinds of challenges. So our hands were certainly full, and safety was always our top priority. Never in our worst dreams would we have imagined that the planes themselves would be targeted and used as weapons in the kind of attack that happened on 9/11.
Were you good at what you did there?
I thought I was. I guess I'll leave it to others to judge. I had a great team. I'm very mission oriented, and really love getting people engaged in a joint mission and accomplishing it together. So I relished that opportunity.
You write in your foreword to the book, and I must say it's a magnificently written book. And you're a fine writer. You really are. Everybody knows where they were when JFK was assassinated. If we were around, everybody knows where they were on 9/11. I went down to work, and The before I did that, though, I watched TV as I would, getting dressed, getting ready, and I saw a plane fly into the World Trade Center. And I thought, probably like most people, Ginny, yeah, there's like a 2-engine plane. Someone had a heart attack at the wheel. And then you see another plane come, fly into the South Tower, I believe it was, north and then south. And then you start to realize, no, man, something's not right here. Something's not. So this is a terrorist attack. And it was horrifying. I went down to the office and I instructed all my staff who were there to go home. We left the office immediately because we were scared in Toronto that, God forbid, there could be a terrorist attack here. And I was in touch with them throughout. And then we went back to the office, I believe, in the next 2 days. 9/11 came. You were responsible for the airport. Tell us the moment that you heard about the terrorist attack.
I was on my way to Logan. Actually, I had a flight scheduled that morning to go to Washington, D.C. and meet with the head of the Federal Aviation Administration about that runway project. It was a key meeting. I was listening to a news radio station, as was my habit in the morning, over a cup of coffee in the car, and heard the report about the first plane. And like you, and like so many others, and I've since read, like the President of the United States himself, thought it was a small plane, thought it was an accident. And I was like, oh, that's awful. I'm sorry to hear that. My first call that came in from my office was, did you hear? Do you still want to go to DC? And I was like, yes, absolutely. And continued making my way towards the airport when I heard live on the radio this report that the second plane had flown in to the second tower, and knew right away, obviously, it was no accident. It was some kind of attack. And my phone rang from my office at Logan again, my cell phone, with one of my team telling me the chilling words that 2 planes were off the radar. 2 planes were off the radar from Logan. And we didn't know more than that right away. But I just directed my colleague who was driving me to the airport to go straight to my office. And I didn't see the report, see the terrible image that you saw until I got to my office. And that was no match for hearing it. Seeing it was shocking.
You wrote that it was really important that your emotions did not get the better of you at that point. You were like a good athlete. You kept your emotions in check. But do you remember the feelings at that moment when you got to the office and saw the planes hitting?
I remember trying to take in the horror without letting it buckle me. And I remember thinking that whatever this was, I had to lead my team through it better than I'd ever done anything in my whole life. And I didn't know more than that. I just had that gut reaction to what we were seeing. And at the time, we did not know whether the planes that struck the towers were from Logan or not. We got a lot of conflicting information in those first hours from the FAA and from the tower and from our own team. And the priority right away was trying to track down every flight that had left from Logan that morning to see where it was. Because as you might recall, the FAA closed the airspace.
Yes.
And directed every plane in the air to land at the safest, most near airport. So finding out where our planes all were, and then at the same time shutting down Logan Airport, locking down all the planes that were on the ground, evacuating thousands of passengers from the terminals became the focus at the same time.
On October 7th, when a major terrorist attack happened in Israel, of course, everybody knows about that, I actually went to a synagogue to lead services that morning. And I remember standing in front of the congregation, a number of people who did not know what had happened in Israel as of that moment. But I remember thinking to myself and saying to myself, okay, I'm a leader within this community, and I have to stand tall, and I have to make sure that I am strong for everybody else. It was hard. I almost caught myself beginning to weep, but I pulled back. Were you surprised at your strength in your response?
I don't know the answer, because who could ever imagine you'd be put in a situation like that?
Right.
So I guess I didn't analyze it one way or the other. I just did what was necessary. And I know we'll get to this, as I'm sure it did with you. You pay a price down the road to what you have to do in the moment, because in the moment you can't fully share, process, embrace, understand the emotional impact of what has happened. And eventually you have to deal with it. And sometimes you don't deal with it for a very long time, and it has consequences.
So take us through the rest of the day and the few days afterwards. You evacuated everybody from the airport. As you said, what did you intuitively know that you needed to do, and what were the laws in place that you had to implement?
Well, the big thing that struck us right away is that the airline industry and the aviation authorities were very focused on reopening the airports in the country. And people were stranded all over the place. And so that was an imperative. And they were sending over throughout that first night and all through the next day directives of things to change in order to reopen. Things like replacing knives from restaurants with plastic cutlery, things like banning curbside drop-off, check-in with luggage, things like that. And it really struck us right away that they were really inadequate changes, given what had happened. And we made the very difficult decision not to reopen along with the rest of the country's airports, which opened on the 13th. Other than Ronald Reagan Airport in DC, they kept that closed for more than a month. But we felt we couldn't open with just making these cosmetic changes, and determined that we would come up with an additional list of measures that we felt at least tried to tackle some of the immediate challenges. It had to happen long term. Creating the TSA and a federal security force couldn't happen in those first few days, but we felt there were things we could do. So we stayed closed for 4 days total and opened on the 15th ultimately.
Dulles did remain closed.
No, not Dulles. Dulles is, to my knowledge, reopened on the 13th, as did Newark. And I guess that's a good point to remind everybody that planes were hijacked from 3 airports at about the same time: Logan, Dulles, and Newark. The other thing to note, not in a defensive way, but just in a factual way, is the security checkpoints were not overseen by any of those airport authorities.
Yes.
They were overseen at the time under federal law by the airlines, who contracted out to security firms. We'll get into this. I believe fully the fault of 9/11 lies with the terrorists who attacked our country, and that all the subsequent investigations found they didn't breach that system of security. They didn't breach the checkpoints. They used the checkpoints. They went through with little knives that were allowed, and
Box cutters, right?
Box cutters, and took over the cockpits, which weren't secured at the time. So they understood the system and they used it.
There's fascinating little nuances that come out in your book about the response to 9/11. And just to jump around for a moment, one of the things which really grabbed me is that prior to 9/11, little kids were welcome into the cockpit, weren't they? And because of the 9/11 attack, that stopped, right?
Yeah, not only that, people from my team actually would ride in the jump seat, and I'm sure this happened all over the country, in the cockpit. I mean, it was allowed for people to sit in the cockpit with the team, with the pilot and the co-pilot.
One of the responses to terrorist attacks in Israel, and I'm going to make, this comparison throughout the interview because I think there's a lot to compare, is an issue that was brought up when they were dealing with the best response to terrorism in a classroom environment, had to do with teachers, mothers, who, when a terrorist attack would happen, it was their responsibility to take care of their classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really big problem because you're a mom and you're thinking about your little one at home. And they came up with a whole strategy as how to deal with that situation in short by having almost like a partner in your neighborhood at home who would know that you were the teacher, you were taking care of the kids. I have to go to your home with my kids and take care of your kids. Now, what's fascinating about your story is you were responsible for this very, very important airport during the worst terrorist attack that's really ever happened. And you had your little guy Jack at home,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's a little boy. You were expecting your daughter, and of course, your husband David was at home as well. How did you juxtapose those two things, knowing your huge responsibility following the attack, and having this little guy at home who relies on you as his mom?
It was a immediate and painful choice that I had to make right away, actually, because Jack was in daycare. He was 2 years old,
Yeah.
and he actually was in a Jewish daycare center.
Yes.
And I had to, in my mind, know that David had him, that David would have to take on the responsibility of protecting Jack, that I couldn't. And I called David actually at one point that morning and asked him to go to the daycare center and get Jack and take him home and keep him safe. And then I went back to focusing on the job at hand. And that's a hard thing for any human being. And I guess mothers or fathers who are in that front-line responsibility, even today, it's good to keep in mind that they're prioritizing us, the public, because that's their job.
Jack, now in his 20s, articling as a lawyer. And of course, we all know him through the book as a little fellow, Does he remember anything that went on at that time?
He remembers being worried about me, and more when he got to be 6, 7, 8 years old, and he asked why I didn't work at the airport anymore. And I would try to, in little kid language, explain that there were bad guys that had taken planes and killed people. And his first question then was, were you at the airport, Mom, when that happened? And I said I wasn't. And he said, I'm glad. So both my kids have grown up knowing the toll of what happened in as the least painful way I could share it with them. Like, I never hid it from them, but I also never shared my deepest moments of despair because I didn't think that was fair, that they shouldn't have to live with that.
A couple of thoughts about love for our children in this context. To love one's children with all one's heart is to discover a force capable of carrying us through life's darkest passages. Their presence reminds us that we are more than the worst things that happen to us and more than the guilt that we may carry. Yet after a devastating incident, especially one that occurred on our watch, love can become complicated. We may fear that our pain will burden our children, even as their love gives us reason to keep living. Does that resonate with you?
It completely resonates. Where's that from?
This is just information I've gathered. I was thinking about how much you love your children and whether they carried you through or not, or whether in fact it just wasn't enough.
I believe that I survived. I'm now at a place of thriving. We can get to that, but that I survived the trauma of being blamed for killing thousands of people because I had children to raise and care for. They needed me. They didn't deserve to bear the burden that was placed on me. And I, with every bit of strength I could muster, raised them with love and kindness and an awareness, I think, of the world. And it's actually what I'm most proud of, that I was able to do that.
On September 9th, 2003, you drove to the water, which was not far from your house. And this is in the book. And you contemplated driving in the water and ending your life after having gone what you went through. You know, again, I'm very much into nuances, Ginny, and you wrote this fascinating thing is that as you drove up to the beach, you saw a couple sitting in their car romantically. You could see they were talking romantically between them. And yet you were in this world which nobody could relate to, entirely different than that romance happening in the car. But ultimately you talked yourself out of it. You went home and you told David that you had considered that, right?
I did. So this happened right after, a few days after being notified that I had been personally sued for wrongful death by a widow who lost her husband, who had 2 little boys at home. And losing my career was one thing that was very difficult, and my reputation and all that. But to face an actual family believing that I was responsible for killing their husband, essentially, was too much. It was just too much. It was completely soul crushing. And I don't blame her. She had to do what she had to do to go forward. But I didn't think I could live with it. I really didn't think I could live with that personal blame. And again, my kids were the ones that saved me, because they didn't deserve to lose their mother because of what had happened. And I went home that evening. I told David, who didn't completely understand at the time. It was so foreign to him, the idea of wanting to end life. And I went into my little boy's room and knelt by his side and promised him I would never leave him on purpose.
You saw him breathing very deeply, right? The way beautiful children, when they sleep,
Yes.
And David said to you, don't you want to see them grow up? Don't you want to be at their weddings, right?
Right. And he didn't understand. And David is Jewish and lives life as someone whose people have faced the worst, right?
Yes.
So like life of joy. He lives a life of joy. And I tried to explain to him that wasn't my choice. Like I wasn't choosing between a life of joy and a life of, pain. I was choosing a life of unbearable pain at that time. And I'm grateful that I was able to get through that and make a better choice.
What's David like?
Oh, he's amazing. He is brilliant. He was a judge in Massachusetts for 27 years. So he's very calm, very intellectual, very, very compassionate. And he thinks I'm the best thing since sliced bread. So that's a good thing for me. He's a great dad. He's a great dad. He's my best friend.
Did you ever see him back off of you at all, or say, I just can't do this, Ginny, I need a break?
No, never. Never, which I would have been like, this is not what I signed up for.
Yeah.
No. And, in the early days, he wasn't clear on how to support me and us, because who could be like, just a civilian whose, loved one is suddenly suffering from PTSD and kind of the public ridicule that I endured. But he worked really hard to understand it. He worked really, really hard to understand it. And over the years he's my biggest fan.
Your dad surprised you a bit, didn't he?
My dad's passed now, but he was a Yankee, Buckingham, who didn't express a lot of emotion in words or hugs or anything like that. But when I was dealing with the immediate aftermath, the 6 weeks or so, when the media was so brutal, and vilifying me in every way they could, he came up by himself without my mom to help me with my son. And it was a gesture. He couldn't say the words, but he showed me that he wanted to support me.
Yet at one point in the book, you say that he actually turned to you while you were listening to a report, the both of you, and he said to you something along the lines of, Ginny, could you have done something?
It wasn't phrased that way. By about 2004, when the 9/11 Commission was doing its investigation, some of the media started raising questions about other public figures, like President Bush himself, like Senator John Kerry, that there were all these, reports about the porous security checkpoints around the country. And so, shouldn't John Kerry have known that the checkpoints were weak was basically the point of the media story that my father was watching. And he looked up at me and said, "Did you know?"
Yeah.
And he didn't mean it this way at all, but I took it this way. It felt like a dagger. It just felt like, if my own dad could ask me, did I know? And, the answer was everybody knew, but no one knew what mattered, was that they were not trying to bring bombs onto the planes. They were going to use the planes themselves as weapons. But those kinds of questions, seated depths in my consciousness for sure.
Where was your mom in all of this?
My mom was a woman of deep faith, and she, I think, tried to help me accept what was going on through that lens, and that didn't really work for me. I grew up Catholic, very deeply Catholic, and that first day, my mom said, "God always has a reason," and that's a tenet of the way I was raised. And boy, did that not sit well with me. I just couldn't contemplate or comprehend that God knew this was happening and stood by and let it happen.
And in fact, somebody you were close with suggested that you write a letter to God.
Yes.
Right? And you contemplated that on the way home after seeing them. After all these years, Ginny, where are you at with God vis-a-vis 9/11?
So I've realized a couple of things. I was raised Catholic, yet I raised my children Jewish. I never converted, but neither tradition really fit anymore.
Yeah.
And I felt like I needed a different approach. In the last several years, I've taken what I called leaps of faith, and I've tried to explore things like meditation and other Eastern practices, and have come to a more trust that there's a greater power without necessarily understanding how it works. So being raised Catholic, it's very clear how it works. You pray, God opens a window. If a door closes, God's involved in your life. I don't know how it works, but I do know something is there greater than me. And I feel like I'm not alone. For a little bit in my time of healing, I felt very alone, and I don't feel alone anymore.
Can you explain that loneliness that you felt?
So being blamed for the greatest terrorist attack in world history is a very isolating thing because it didn't happen to anyone else. And the reaction to that fact is to either dismiss it and say, "Oh, that didn't really happen," or to try to explain it like, "Oh, everyone needs a scapegoat." That's what I get a lot. And whatever the reaction, the reality is that is what happened to me, and I have to bear it. And it's a very lonely place to be.
I was really waiting throughout the book for you to write about other individuals who in some way, be it on a smaller scale or larger perhaps, had experienced what you experienced. And near the end of the book, you write about a fellow by the name of Michael Tooney. Michael Tooney.
Tui. Yes, Tui.
This is a really interesting story, Jenny. Walk us through that story.
So I came across him through my mom, actually, who saw him on Oprah.
Yeah.
And he, back in the day, in the early 2000s, and he experienced a super amount of guilt related to 9/11 because he was the gate agent at Portland Airport in Maine, where two of the terrorists, including Muhammad Atta, decided to fly to Boston from Maine. No one even today knows exactly why they chose to do that, but he confronted them at the gate. They were running late and they were checking in, and they had an interaction that was really uncomfortable, but nothing actionable. There was, two business guys from Michael Tui's point of view who were being rude, pretty much.
Yes.
But afterwards, he says, I knew I was looking at the devil, but I just couldn't do anything about it. And he was devastated and guilt-ridden, and was telling the story to Oprah and then subsequently in Yankee Magazine. And I thought, here's someone who understands that he's racked with guilt. There's nothing he could have done. I want to help him. I want to tell him that there was nothing he could have done. So I tracked him down, called him, and he left a message. He called me back, and we talked like people who knew each other to the depths of their soul for an hour about how we felt about the position we were in, how we wished there was something we could do. And at the end, when we said goodbye, I said, well, I don't know if we'll speak again, Michael, but I hope we do. And he said, well, Virginia, we share a pain. And that was a gift, because up until then, I didn't feel I shared that pain with anyone.
Have you been in touch with him since?
I've not.
But
I see him occasionally.
He's out there somewhere,
Yeah.
right?
Occasionally on TV around the anniversary, still pressing for security changes and things like that.
Boy, life changes in a second, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Being able to handle that, carry that, come out the other side changed is the purpose of humanity, right? Because we all bear something.
We all bear something. That's very true. I have a strong propensity for religious ideas and thoughts. My father was a rabbi. I gave up Orthodox Jewry when I was about 20, but I pursued what's called Tikkun Olam Jewry. Do you know what Tikkun Olam is?
It's one of my favorite
Comes
concepts.
it?
Yes, I hope very much that that's what I am practicing.
Yeah, so Tikkun Olam is what, Ginny?
Repairing the world, doing
Correct.
what you can as an individual to repair the world.
Yes, yes. So I want to just put by you a few thoughts, religious ideas on responsibility of humankind. Because if someone were in an elevator with me and they said, tell me what Ginny's book is about, I would say it's on grappling with our own personal responsibility in life. Would you say at the core of it, that's what your book is about?
At the core of it, I would say my book is about redefining what resilience looks like as a human being, so that we can bear whatever we have to bear and use it for good to bring light to other people.
Okay, excellent. So here are some thoughts on responsibility from a Judaic point of view. Tell me what you think. Judaism teaches that although circumstances influence us, we remain responsible for examining our conduct, admitting our mistakes, and making amends. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? Classic line in Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, an important book in Judaism. Responsibility, however, must be based on truth, not false guilt for events beyond one's control. So there you were. You were the director of Logan Airport on 9/11. Subsequently, you were forced to resign. And then you went through this lengthy period of time grappling with Where were you in all of this? Where did you fit? Were you responsible at all? People kept telling you you were, and you got some scathing emails and letters to the editors saying, how do you live with yourself? Terrible things, terrible things. So, in terms of the Jewish response, Judaism teaches that although circumstances influence us, we remain responsible for examining our conduct, admitting our mistakes, and making amends. How does that resonate with you?
I wish that I had been able to hold on to the reality of what was my personal responsibility and what wasn't, and was able to hear the voices of blame and accusation, but not take them in as truth. And for a long time, I struggled with that because those that were blaming me were not, random people on Twitter. Thank God we didn't have Twitter back then. These were very well-respected journalists, editorial page editors, governors. These were real people that I spent my career working with. So I had a hard time just dismissing out of hand the criticism that I could have done something. But I think that it's really important to make the differentiation of what is yours to bear and what isn't. And it took me longer than I wish it did, but I finally got there and am able to say with clarity that there was nothing I could do to change what happened that day. No matter how much I wish there just wasn't. And you'll know the reference. I don't know, but I know it's a prayer that resonates with me when my family and I go to services. May you find the courage to make your life a blessing.
Yes.
So no matter what you go through, do something with it that helps other people.
Is your life a blessing, Jenny?
Yes.
It is.
Yes. Very, very, very grateful that it has become one. And I feel like I want other people who go through unimaginable, trying circumstances to know you can get to a place where your life can be a blessing too.
You talk about those people, important people who were critical of you. But you wrote about President George Bush, who I think his reputation today is of a warm fellow. He's very embracing. And you were at a program with him, hoping so badly that he would let you off the hook, say you were not responsible for 9/11. But instead, he came over, he hugged you, and he whispered in your ear, "You're a good person." Did that help?
A little, not a lot. For a long time, I was seeking that external exoneration and validation. And I never found it from him or from anyone else. And I had to learn that you can't wait for that. You have to, how I use the term, be your own hero. You have to believe in yourself and understand the truth of your responsibility and hold that as tight as you can and not wait for someone else to be your hero. It's a hard lesson because that's what everyone wants, don't we? To be saved by someone.
I would say almost miraculously, you decided that you would attend the 9/11 anniversaries, and they were not easy. There was one that you attended where there were 210 or so names on a memorial, and you went through each name. You read them all, and I think you saw someone there, if I remember correctly, and you kind of whispered to them, "I'm sorry." And it wasn't quite clear at that moment when I was reading it why you were sorry or what you were actually saying to them. What were you saying to them?
I am so sorry that they suffered and died and their families continue to suffer. I'm so, so sorry about that. I know I couldn't have changed it, but as a human being, I'm so heartbroken for what they went through and are going through.
Yes. Buddhism, which you like, right? Buddhism emphasizes karma. Wholesome intentions and actions tend toward healing, while harmful ones produce suffering. The Buddha taught, it is intention that I call karma. We cannot control every event, but we are responsible for how mindfully and compassionately we respond. Within that, there was another piece of your book where you said that America has sort of this blame character about it, right? This is kind of contrary to the idea of karma. Did it help you?
You know, it's a good question. I mean, I hope that I am modeling how to carry something that's unjust, which is also part of the human experience, right? We all experience injustice in this world. It's interesting, and I don't know the answer to this, but recently in the last few years, I met someone who's, I don't know if she's a practicing Buddhist, but she definitely believes in the idea of karma. And when she heard my story, she said, I wonder what you did in a past life to deserve what happened. And my immediate response was, I didn't do anything. This happened because I could do good with it. And I don't know if that's true either, but that's how I feel. I wouldn't want it to have happened to anyone else. I wish it didn't happen to me, but if it was going to happen to me, at least I feel like I'm able to take it and try to make people's lives better.
You know, shortly after 9/11, you were quoted as saying that somebody asked you if you're the scapegoat in all of this, and you said, I don't think so. I think people are just trying to figure out some answers to this terrible situation. I've done a little investigation into scapegoating, and I'd like to put a few things by you and tell me what you think of this, because indeed, you were a scapegoat to many people, and we need to figure out why that was. Scapegoating transforms fear into blame. Scapegoating transforms fear into blame. When tragedy feels too complicated or frightening to comprehend, people often seek one individual upon whom they can place their anger. Does that make sense to you?
It makes total sense. I don't like the word, I guess, is where I struggle, because I don't ever want to come across like I feel like I'm a victim, because I don't want to come across as, weak. I want to, own what happened and, as I've said a lot of times, do good with it. So I guess it's the word, but the concept I've come to understand is absolutely a reflex of human beings, both politically, societally, culturally, that when something happens that is terrifying or makes you so angry, to relieve that fear and anger, you look for something or someone to blame. And in the case of the hijackings from Logan Airport, I became that person, for the media, for politicians, for some in the public, because it, I think, helped them deal with what had happened. That if it was my fault because I was a political appointee at Logan Airport, then this couldn't happen again. If they get rid of me, then they're safer. And, individually, I write in the book, it takes a toll, obviously, on a person. But as a society, when we place blame on whole cultures, as we do in our world, the ramifications of scapegoating whole peoples are what we saw in the Holocaust and the Armenian genocide, and I could go on and on. So it's much bigger and more important than any one person being scapegoated.
There's a guy who used to call you, we called you a few times, and started to basically yell at you on the phone about how you were responsible for 9/11. You would hang up on him. I'm thinking throughout the book how I would have responded if I were in your situation. And I don't know that I would have been in as control as you were. I would have yelled and shouted at people and stop, just shut the F up and go away. I don't know if I would have become violent, perhaps, but did you ever lose it?
Yeah, and David, poor guy.
On your husband. Yeah. I think you wrote about that. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So when the 9/11 Commission came out with their conclusion that the security checkpoints at Logan were the same as any other
Yeah.
airports, and that their belief was that the airport was targeted because we had fully loaded jets with fuel going to the West Coast, close to New York. Everyone was like, "You must be so relieved." Well, that's great. You've been exonerated. And instead, what I felt was a rage, a deep, deep rage that if what was true had always been true, and indeed it was always true that Logan Airport wasn't any different and I wasn't responsible at all, how could I have lost so much? And nearly my life, certainly my sense of worth and meaning, and was it all purposeless? And so calling David that evening when he had the same reaction, "This is so great. You've been exonerated." I'm not sure his ears have stopped ringing, but he just, all these years later, he let me just vent and unleash, and knew it was from a place of deep grief. And I'm grateful that I had that.
Ginny, are you proud of yourself as to how you conducted yourself following 9/11?
I'm very proud of the leadership I provided to my team in those first weeks before I had to resign. I'm very proud of how I raised my children. I very much wish it didn't take me so many years to wrap my head and heart around the truth that I couldn't have changed anything. And I'm very proud that I'm helping other people with my story. So I have some regret that it took me so long, but I guess I just have to accept it took what it took.
Just one more piece about scapegoating. Scapegoating satisfies emotions but rarely delivers justice. Punishing an available target may create the appearance of accountability, yet true justice requires evidence, fairness, and the courage to confront uncomfortable facts. Your thoughts on that?
I'm grateful that 5 years ago, at the 20th anniversary, a reporter at the New York Times decided to look at the facts in the story and what had happened in Boston, and went back to a lot of the media that had written or spoken about me, and asked if they had reconsidered given the evidence that had come. And some didn't, but mostly they did. And one reporter in particular said, there was a kind of hysteria at the time that somehow Massport appointees could have done something, but it was just that hysteria. And that, I thought, it was just an important statement of, you call it justice maybe, but it's truth. I think truth matters. And having, you don't usually get that kind of recognition of something having been done unjustly.
There are times throughout the book where you very subtly mention kindness happening around you. As an example, you walked into a room with some hostility in that room, and someone, I believe, just smiled at you. And you embrace that moment of kindness as much as you were embracing at that time the difficulties happening inside of you because of the accusations leveled at you. Is the world mostly kind?
Yes, I think so. I find it every day. I find it especially if you emote kindness, that is reflected back at you. The kindness of total strangers in this 25-year now journey has saved me so many times. People who didn't have to, just reaching out if they saw me in the grocery store and knew something of my story and smiled, touched my arm. People who have read the book and reached out and said thank you. That really helped me. The power of compassion of 9/11 families. I talk about one in particular in my book, Anne McFarlane, whose daughter was on United 175, who I reached out to in the year after, and we became so much each other's support system over the years. She was so compassionate to me and what had happened, and I did my best to support her through all the terrible times of finding remains and dealing with the loss of her only daughter. It blows my mind that people can be that kind. And I try, but it's really a model that I hope I could someday live up to.
Ginny, how deeply does your love run today?
My love?
Yeah, how deeply does it go?
Right to the core. It's everything.
And do you show it?
Within the limits of my Yankee upbringing, I definitely,
Yes, right. I was going to ask. Yes.
I definitely do. But probably more in action than in words, but in action, for sure.
Do you hate the terrorists?
No, I don't hate anybody.
How is that possible?
I just don't think it's useful.
So how do you think about them?
I try not to think about them, I guess would be the answer.
Yeah. I get it. I get it. I have a poem here that AI has composed for you. It's Ode to Virginia Buckingham, and I will read it to you now. There are days that divide the earth into two, a before of promise, and after stained with ash. Virginia stood where duty met the unimaginable. 35, a leader, a mother, a name the world would learn to blame. 2 planes rose from Logan into a September sky. 2 wounds open in the heart of history. And while a nation searched for meaning, politics searched for someone placing sorrow upon her shoulders. She was not the hand that formed terror, nor the mind that summoned death. She did not write the rules of screening, possess the warnings, or foresee airplanes transformed into weapons. Still, conscience asked its question, could I have done more? And blame, repeated loudly enough, entered her spirit like winter through broken glass, until guilt began impersonating truth. Yet love remained, a husband beside her, children whose hands reached beyond darkness, reminding her that a wounded life is a life worth holding. Faith whispered, examine what is yours, but do not confess to another's evil. Justice answered, responsibility is not scapegoating. Healing said, you need not move on. You may move forward, carrying memory honestly. Like a bottle tossed against the waves, she was weathered, not erased. She gathered the scattered pieces of her name and wrote herself back into being. For sometimes courage is not escaping the fire, but refusing to let the fire name you. Sometimes survival begins when love grows larger than pain. And a woman like Ginny Buckingham, with a wounded spirit, stands again on her watch in her truth.
Wow. A wounded life is still worth living. Very much so. You still can have love and joy with
Damn,
your
I was trying to make you cry in this interview. I didn't do it. Trying to do the Oprah thing here.
Did it more than you know, but mostly you filled me with just the joy of a kind person understanding their story.
You know, there is so much to learn from you. There's so much that I learned from your book about resilience, about rebuilding yourself, about relationships and how they can carry you. And I recommend, honestly, with all my heart, and I've spoken to many, many authors in my day, I recommend so strongly that people buy your book. I know that people have a tendency to want to know all the sort of information that happened on the day and after that and so on. And I specifically didn't want to go there because I want to know what's in your soul. Having gone what you went through and who else has gone through what you've gone through, and sharing that with other people towards my healing and towards the healing of others. And I think you do that magnificent, Ginny. So I want to give you a big embrace and express my love to you. And thank you so much for sharing your innermost thoughts with all of us in a very difficult situation. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I'm very honored to have had this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginny. Our very best to your husband and your children. And, you know, my mother used to say, God bless her soul, sei gesund. It's Yiddish. Do you know what it means?
No.
Oh, Ginny, I thought you would know that. It, it means go in good health until we meet again. Thank you so much for watching and so much for listening. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
See you. Thank you.